Hi, welcome to SPH Disability Services Education Team's presentation on executive functioning. During this presentation, we will look at how a student with difficulties with executive functioning will exhibit in the classroom and what strategies you as a teacher could implement for them. First thing we really need to look at is, or try to nut out, is what is executive functioning? It's a term that we quite often use when we describe a child that is just in that grey area of curriculum, when it doesn't quite get the concepts and sometimes has difficulty expressing themselves. And executive functioning is really known as the group of complex mental processes and cognitive abilities, such as working memory, impulse control and reasoning. And these skills control organising tasks, remembering details, and managing time and solving problems that are usually required for goal-directed behaviour. So when you're in the classroom, it's that a child that is unable to follow the process or the sequence of which you've given, and quite often will come up with a task or incomplete task for you within the deadlines. So we're just looking at how all these tasks get together in your brain and how you in the classroom can actually implement change to help them put structure into their work. What does the executive functioning look like for within the classroom? As I just touched on before, it was about the student that is not starting tasks or starting tasks impulsively without planning what steps are necessary, trouble coping with the complexity of tasks, jumping from one topic to another, or going off on tangents in conversations, oral presentations of written tasks, or completing a task but not meeting the goal that was actually set, or understanding parts of a task of a subject but not being able to integrate them effectively. So it's really segmented in the way that they write it, or not knowing where things are, or just forgetting things. The other things are not, it's just not being able to learn new tasks. It's hard for them that they will constantly ask questions, or difficulty prioritizing work or organizing their homework. We see these skills in a lot of our children. But executive functioning difficulty children it's just ongoing, and it goes not only with the written task, it's a sporting task, it's ongoing activities that just cross over into everyday skills that they are finding difficulty, getting ready for school in the morning, even just packing their bag at the end of the day is the ongoing tasks that they have great difficulty with. How can we help the children that we find that have trouble following instruction or completing tasks, that have this executive functioning difficulties in classroom? It's more of role modelling the opportunities of learning, identifying the steps, staying calm with them, praise and identify what motivates that individual, because that's your key. If you know how to motivate them or what they're like as a reward, it doesn't have to be an object. It might just be you're doing a great job. Something that the child feels as though they feel success with, and it's like a great moment for them. That's something that motivates them. Building that habit, like reinforcing it, talking about how great it is that you did this, and maintaining the habit. Like, reward them when they do it independently. But it's ongoing reinforcement from you as the teacher to ensure that this child will keep up the strategies and then begin to be independent with it. How are they going to attack new tasks? That is their major issue. That is something that they find great difficulty in. So it's really helpful as a teacher if you look at identifying the task, writing out a plan or an outline, Look for the goal and identify the checkpoints. Break tasks into mini tasks. Time management, which is a big issue, and focus on each task at a time. Now, as teachers, we do that generally in the classroom for all of our children. But the children with the executive functioning difficulties that have that cognitive overload, it's something that has to be done personally, has to be done checked in it. It needs for that child to feel like that somebody they're accountable to somebody and themselves in the end. But you need to make that special effort as a teacher just to try and check in with them and make sure that they're hitting their deadlines, not by the time that deadline's hit, 2 days beforehand, maybe the morning beforehand. Just plant that seed for that child to realize, oh, I need to do this. To succeed, I need to do this. If you come to the deadline date, then they go, oh, I've already failed. So they won't want to keep those little deadlines up. So it's really important as a teacher that we reinforce all these behaviours initially over and over again as if we're doing it. So it's normal. And then independently, they want to take it on for that internal drive. The first thing you would really notice about a child with an executive function difficulty is their planning and organisation. It looks like they have a messy desk and notebooks. They can't find their belongings when asked. They have difficulty producing a sequential written task. Stops working on any task when it comes a bit difficult. They just start avoiding it, or they start talking to their friends and making a distraction. Procrastinates by doing other more enjoyable tasks, or needs frequent teacher cues to keep them on task, and doesn't work well independently. So they need a partner with them to keep them on track. What strategies you can use for this child would be display a daily schedule to provide structure by first teaching a broad outline and then providing the details later by not overloading it. Just, this is the details, and then come back and slot the more nutty and the more beefy details later. And offer limited choices. Would you like to do X or Y? Would you like to do A or B? Or that template of first and then next. That's something that works very well as well. It's probably not giving the choice, but it's like, this is what you need to do first, and then we get to do this. So ensure your handouts that put a structure that allow the student to use a folder for their handouts instead of pasting them in the book. I know that quite often, we think if it's all pasted in one book, it's great. But they won't paste it in sequential order. It'll just be on one page at the back or on the side, or you can't even fold the book properly. But if it's in a folder that you can slide it in and out, it's easier for them to reference, easier for them to find. And it just is helpful than just being shoved in a book where there is no order to start with. Provide opportunities for the student to think out loud and talk through what they perceived as the task. You'll often find a child with executive difficulties, when they're writing, they're actually talking at the same time or mumbling at the same time. Or when they're finding there's a difficulty, they start looking up in the air and they're like, well, what if I do this? Or what if I do that? That is a child that is constantly trying to make order and plan, and they're showing that they're having difficulty, just finding a simple way to express it. There is other areas that will be difficulty as well as the planning and organisation, which we see is the working memory. Working memory is a concept that is often used a lot in reports with children with executive difficulties, or just many other disabilities, but just with learning difficulties. It's a concept that talks about a person or an individual to be able to retain that information long enough into their short-term memory to be able to then relay it immediately. So it's where for a child with mathematics that has difficulties trying to remember the calculations they've done in their head before they get to write it onto the paper in a maths exam or just in class. It looks like a student that fails to complete tasks, difficulty following directions. They can't remember the instructions that you gave them 2 minutes ago because they only can remember the first maybe 1 or 2 instructions, and that was to go to their desk or find their chair or to get out a book, and then they're like, oh, what was I meant to do after that? What page was I meant to got turned to? So it's incomplete, and also it's incomplete responses to oral questions. They were too busy trying to listen to you to then work out what actually you were trying to say, and struggles with the maths and the difficulties in recalling plots of events and character traits. They know there was a link, but they can't quite recall the name, or they can't recall the event, so they'll try to explain it instead of just using the terminology. And the strategies as a teacher you would use would be in the classroom would be information that should be presented in a sequential, step-by-step manner. Link past learning with new learning. To teach your students strategies for remembering, such as writing important dates in the diary and using scrap paper for working out. So as they're thinking it, write the numbers out, and then it's not so much the relying what's going on in the brain. They help the student decide what is important information and what is not needed by using highlighters. Highlighters can be a child with executive functioning difficulties' best friend. Time management, which is something that the children with executive functionings really have difficulty with. It's that difficulty of producing the work on time, underestimates how long a task will take, and often leaving it to the last minute. Always misses the deadlines, and always, well, not always, but arrives late to class, or is always trying, to find that stuff in their locker, or find that stuff in their bag or their desk that they knew they had, but they couldn't find it that immediate moment. The strategies you could use are provide visual representation of time, such as clock, countdown timers, planners, and calendars. You explicitly teach the completion of the work and connect with daily and weekly schedules. So you model, this will be due on Friday, so you will need to have part 1 done by Wednesday. Provide deadlines and check-ins for tasks, and work closely also with the parents so they're aware of the deadlines. For them not to do it, but just for reminders at home. Have you started that work? Have you, do you need to check in with your teacher? Do you not understand it? Having those questions at home too, so you're working in conjunction with each other, really helps these children with difficulties, because they tend to be inflexible. Flexibility for a child with difficulties with executive functioning is they easily get upset by the change in plans. Doesn't adapt well to disruptions that are in the class, or disruptions by another child trying to ask a question. It takes them off track. Finds it difficult to look other ways around the problem. Problem solving, complex problem solving, you will see this more when they hit, high school years, where it's independent. A teacher doesn't talk through the problem. That individual, that student has to try to show that they're problem solving. This is something that is very difficult, because they can't look outside what they're actually doing. They can't look at it another way sometimes. Finds it difficult to move on to another project whilst not finished the previous task. So having a few projects on going at one time when it comes to high school, with all the many subjects, having different homework deadlines, it's prioritizing the inflexibility. But I was doing my maths homework, I need to finish it, but the science one could be finished, now, this afternoon. Things to do is keep schedule, to show them, the child, that you can do part A today and then part B tomorrow. It's not saying that you can't, you have to continue on to the end. You are going to finish it, but visually show that there's another time slot for it. Provide advance notice when the routine will be changed. Break tasks down so that the student doesn't get overwhelmed with the whole task. I quite often find it's very helpful to have a white piece of paper, just plain, and then you just put that piece of paper over chunks of the work and slide it down when they're finished. I find that the student doesn't get overwhelmed with the whole paper or the whole task. It's visually showing them that, it can be achieved by breaking it down into different sections. Role play. As a teacher, role play, it's going to be difficult for the student. So you allow role playing with you as a teacher, or with, a peer, of creating activities of, how will you solve this issue, or how can you do this? And allowing that child to see different points of view and be able to sit back and go, oh, so there is other ways of doing it. For the student that has concentration and attention difficulties, is quite often seen for our children with functional, difficulties, executive functioning difficulties. They fail to complete the task on time. They have difficulty reading comprehension activities. They've forgotten what they were reading at the beginning to the end. They get distracted by the environment around them, and rushes through and often gives up quickly on tedious tasks. They're the kid that rushes and is messy, and they think that they've finished it, and they won't look back and go through and look for mistakes. They cannot recall verbal information. It's not that they cannot, it's that they have great difficulty. Some children do have that difficulty. That's that working memory issue. Others are just sketchy, so they confuse things and mend instructions or information into one concept, which it's a great difficulty for them, and following the instructions. So the strategies you would use is check for the understanding and ask the student for their understanding and rephrase if needed. I always ask the student to tell me what you've understood, what I've just said. And if they can't repeat it back, then they don't know what you've said, or they haven't got a good understanding of what the task involved. Use the visual cues. Visual cues are your go-to. And that's not just pictures, but it just might be cues of your face, or what's around the classroom, and look at that picture over there. It doesn't have to be the cues of, sit here, or, what we often use as a visual schedule of what we've used in the younger children of sit, do your maths now, you'll get out a book, you'll get out, your pen. It's about using cues around the room of what might be outside, what the leaf, the trees on the leaf, have you seen that tree outside? Bring something that is visual for a visual representation that will help this child relate it or reinforce their understanding. Scaffolding sheets are a go-to. To increase their independence, you need scaffolding sheets, something that you would normally say and communicate in front of the class. They will need that written down later on. So just having scaffolding sheets of, this is what a paragraph looks like, 4 sentences here, and this is what the sentence looks like to start with. That increases independence. It increases their feeling of success. So they'll reinforce that behavior. Gradually increase attention span by using a timer or providing breaks. Sometimes helps with the child having breaks, sometimes maybe not. Sometimes with a timer of, you'll do this for 5 minutes, and then they may it works with some children because they'll focus on looking the time. Oh, 5, okay, when the big hand hits the 10, I'm okay. Other children, they obsess about that big hand hitting the 10, that you need one of those timers that counts down. So it's not telling them what time it goes to, it's telling them how much time they have left. Where possible, provide support of check-ins. Again, check-ins are the most important thing, where they build a relationship with your teacher. There's a lot of important things, but the visual cues, the relationship, the check-ins, and just making sure that they have that safe person to go to. Use their interests and their motivation. What individually makes them, that child, want to achieve something, and give praise at all time when that child is on task. Praise will go a long way, because therefore then they feel good. Emotions is something that a child will have difficulty expressing sometimes. They're the child that has the frequent tantrums, overreacts to small problems, becomes overly anxious, can be slow to recover from disappointments, may encounter social problems, blurts out answers without raising a hand, talks back or makes insensitive comments to others, and can't wait while the teacher or the parent is talking to somebody else. They're the child where the parent might come in and want to talk to you, and they go, "Mum, mum, mum," or they're trying to interrupt all the time. The strategies that you could possibly use would be introduce the concept of first and then to encourage work before play. Establish rules and consequences which are understood and discussed. Required behaviour before entering in the situation, and rewards for self-control. So it probably be more self-regulation, not control, because they're still trying to regulate themselves. So they're learning how to control. So before the control comes to regulation of, a trial and error, and for that student to start identifying what works for that themselves. So before you go out to PE, there'll be a new teacher today. They will possibly be asking this, they will change the rules for this game, and then check in with them on the way back. How did you go with that? Oh, what a great job you did. Develop routine that is predictable, but also not too predictable enough that there is still room to be flexible. So, you will be going to the library, you will be taking out a book, you may, but not so much explicit that the one teacher will be putting out the book. Up at the person, an adult, or, a different staff member. It's having that sense of there is a sequence, but not making it so rigid that they're only stuck with the one person that will be doing it, because therefore then they feel anxious again. So it's a fine line between being predictable but not too rigid, because you want to promote flexibility. So promote also with that child positive self-talk. Wow, you did a great job. Didn't you do a great job? Yes. And promote that by developing a script for the student to say in stressful times. What will you say to a teacher out in the playground that that I struggle with getting to the water tap on time? Of give them a script to say to the teacher, I need to go get a drink now, or just give them those scripts, those things to say that they feel safe in saying. So the goal in the end of also identifying all these skills, or the things they have, concepts they have difficulty with, is to build on that student's organisation and planning skills to complete a task that requires multiple steps. That is the goal, for a student to be able to independently do that without you being the main instigator of it. You need to reinforce it, you implement it, but in the end you want to step away. So you want to give this child all the skills to be successful on their own. So, be aware, for the student to be aware of the job that will, and the several steps that will take, knowing all those steps and what to do, and being able to plan and sequence for these steps, and to estimate how much time it will take in that step, and allow enough time to work through those steps, and sticking with the task until the whole activity is completed. That's the final goal that you want the student to be doing independently. So the first example I'll give you about is, a task that we all do in class is story writing. So who's in the story? What is the name of the main character? What do they like? When does the story happen? Where does the story happen? And what is the problem? For example, is the character scared or angry about something? How is the problem solved? And how does the story end? There was a lot of different templates around. It's the story mountain, where it's a step-by-step procedure. It gives the child or the student structure. And they need that structure. That is a good one, but quite often with the mountain structure or format, it doesn't have a lot of scaffolding in there for them, the child. So you need to break it down into the beginning. What happens in the beginning? Who is the main character? Where is it set? Now the build-up. Now the problem. And on this other template I'm showing you here, it explains all the questions that is not in the mountain templates. But it's those little scaffolding bits that you need to have separate to then transfer on there. All those little questions that people will think in their mind to be able to remember, needs to have it there written for the students to be able to tick them off, to make sure that they have thought about them through properly. The other example is like writing tasks of, just understanding all different ways of writing, whether it's a research writing, whether it's persuasive writing, whether it's a report, like a scientific report, or even a report, like a newspaper report. And also it's the idea of paragraphs. And, having a different variety of paragraphs up their sleeve to know what to write in it. We often talk about the teal or the peel, or, there is many different versions of the point, the evidence, and the example, the evidence, and then the link, or to sum it up. The children with executive functioning will probably do that same paragraph each time because it's a simple one. Often giving them alternatives of how, in a persuasive writing, you will probably not write a peel each time. There will be there's a compare and there's a contrast, or you try to drum in your points or your opinions. So it is giving them examples of different paragraphs and having that explicitly written so they can complete the tasks to, the same standard as other peers, with the correct selection criteria. They often ask for different types of paragraphs. So it's giving them a fair chance to feel like they can succeed with like everybody else. Another example would be the assignment planning. So the templates that would be needed would be like the task, time, and plan, giving them a template with little tick sheets or writing a date and when explicitly is, and then another one would be like a tick sheet saying, yes, you've done it, as well as having like a 2-week timetable that they could put it across 2 weeks or the time span that they're meant to be doing it in, to achievable chunks. And having tasks where they can say, I've completed that by this time, is helpful for it's that forward planning that we need to embed with our children with executive functioning difficulties. Assistive technology is something that really works well with our children with executive functioning difficulties because of their working memory, their processing speed, having so much difficulties with, just putting thoughts down onto paper. Some schools, if they have a disability, a verified disability, or, something that has already been identified by a medical professional, a psychologist, quite often, the children that have this will maybe have Dragon or Read Write Gold, which is the extra costs. But Microsoft Word is good for our children to start trying to trial this on to see whether it works without outlaying all the money of, Dragon and Read Write Gold. Plus, those programs can be quite complex to, for a child that has difficulty following instructions. It's complex with, you've got to click this, you need to click, then you click this button, to make it read, you've got to highlight this. Where Microsoft Word is just as good at times. I mean, it's not as clear, but it's easier to organize. You highlight, then you go up to the toolbar and click, read aloud. Then if you want to dictate, go back up to the toolbar and go, dictate. And then if you've got a headset with a microphone, they can talk into it and put at least a skeleton of their thoughts down, and then they can go back and type in it and expand on it. It doesn't have to be used for the whole, task at times. It can just be getting those initial thoughts down. Or other people like having their initial thoughts down on paper and then going back and dictating the final copy once it's all worked out onto the document. It's whatever works with the child, and you've got to problem solve and work out which works best. But using assistive technology tends to take the emotion out of a lot of it. They don't get so frustrated. Their working memory, at least it puts all their thoughts down on the paper. It looks at their processing speed. So sometimes trying to work out what a task and what they're going to say, if you just put a headset on them, they can just say it. It sort of helps with the time management part of it too, instead of taking so long to write things because they've got to remember how to spell the word. It's helpful in so many ways that it creates successful outcomes, especially when it comes to writing, because writing and reading and writing, but writing is such a laborious task. And the reading comprehension, because they could read something and forget what they've read. But if it's read to them, they don't have to go through that whole mental complexity of trying to work out what the word looks like, remember what that word looks like, and remember what was happening with that word in the actual story. So we've found assistive technology works very well with our children with executive functioning difficulties. Finally, I will talk about the visual representation of the text. The way the printed material is presented has an impact on how easily students access information. For students with visual perceptual difficulties, having text in digital format is very beneficial, as it can be easily edited for readability. some of the ways that we could change the format of the way the text looks like would be the font. Make it consistent, not too small. A simple typeface. Consistent color, high contrast with the background. Background color would be also make that there is a high contrast between the background shade and the text shade. One should be very dark and the other one should be very light. Avoid mixing colors. Text spacing, reduce text clutter. Keep plenty of white space on the page. Sometimes it's helpful for extra space to be done between, certain important concepts you want children to learn. Editable text. This allows the custom viewing of and accommodates the individual needs. So you give the child, if they've got laptops or iPads, you give them text and that they could adapt it to how they prefer to read it. And structure and text layout. It is important to reduce distractions. Make sure the reading order is clear and it's simple. Not so much with all the pictures. We have some visual cues in there, but not with the fancy borders or, making sure the headings are, sometimes that shadow heading is difficult, but just making it very simple, clear line, and all pictures have something to relate with what the text or what the object of the task is. The final point is checklists. We do have some checklists that you could use where a student would like to complete it, and it helps you identify the different areas of executive functioning difficulties, if they have any, with planning, organisation. Not all children have all of these difficulties with executive functioning. Some have just little certain sections that you can fine tune. There is some student checklists, and I've also got some teacher a checklist that is done as a screener. So it will look at more of how their executive functioning is exhibiting. Is it more in emotional control? Is it in task avoidance? Is it more in working memory? Or is it a combination? But it looks at at the behavior and emotional, and whether it's a cognitive task that the child is having the most difficulty in with his executive functioning. I hope you found this presentation helpful. If you have any questions, please give us an email or give us a call. I'll be more than happy to talk through any other concepts or come and show you how you could adapt the tasks you've got in your class to adapt for the individual child that you may have. Thank you for your time.